Prime Minister of Barbados, but as a representative of St. Peter. And I feel, Mr. Speaker, that thought should be given to the erection of a monument in his honor. In my view, the ideal place for any such memento would be the roundabout that leads into Spikestown, north of Cobbler's Cove Hotel in his honor. Owen Arthur was a very modest man who didn't seek personal glorification in monuments and honors. However, sir, in my view, and after consultation with his widow and family, every effort, Mr. Speaker, should be made to create a tasteful monument that would, Mr. Speaker, be tastefully and tangibly and visually reflect both his wishes and appreciation as a grateful nation. He was a great Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. To his wife, to his widow, Julie, whose grace and elegance adorn Barbados with humility, and whose guiding hand will have to lead now his daughter, Leah, and to his other daughter, Sabrina. But in particular, Mr. Speaker, to Leah, a well-composed young lady who spoke, Mr. Speaker, for the world to see with confidence, a hallmark of Owen Arthur. And when she spoke, Mr. Speaker, I remembered Owen Arthur. As she read the Bible lesson at her father's funeral, certainly would have done her father proud. On a personal note, Mr. Speaker, I will miss a dear friend, a man of remarkable intellect, one who believed in Barbados and understood the political landscape, a visionary, Mr. Speaker, who understood how to develop people and how to transform Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, if only he had his hand at the wheel much longer, perhaps Barbados would have accomplished that goal of being a developed nation. I'm happy, sir, very pleased to have met a man like Owen, like Professor the late, the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur in my lifetime. May his memory live on for the glory and the pride of a grateful nation. To you, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honorable Mr. Michael Norvez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to add my contribution to the record of tributes echoed by the honorable members of this House, honoring the leadership of the former statesman and late Prime Minister Owen Seymour Arthur. Owen Arthur's journey and humble beginnings shaped him into becoming the best, and he never forgot where he came from. Owen Arthur was a man who was very determined and fearless. Owen Arthur was a man who created opportunities for poor people to embrace. Owen Arthur was a man who faced any challenge and fixed it. Mr. Speaker, sir, I remember I was 14 years old when the late statesman became the Prime Minister of Barbados back in 1994. I can remember the good things the late statesman did for this country, Mr. Speaker, sir. I can remember the hardship my mother, Myrna, and the people of Barbados had to endure at the hands of the Democratic Labour Party administration, especially with the 8% pay cut back in those days. Mr. Speaker, sir, when the unemployment rate under the DLP back in the 90s was at 22.98%, And when the late statesman became the Prime Minister and took over the government of Barbados on the 6th of September 1994, jobs were created and the unemployment rate was cut in half and reduced to 10.61% by the year 1999. This is a perfect example of how the former late Prime Minister Oinafa used to face it and fix it. Mr. Speaker, sir, the late statesman did not stop there. He went on to further transform Barbados and the people in a way to benefit many generations to come. Mr. Speaker, sir, when the Urban Development Commission and Rural Development Commission were conceived and came into existence at the hands of the late statesman, those two departments are perfect examples of the true meaning of transformation in Barbados under his leadership for poor people to benefit and many generations to come, Mr. Speaker, sir. I have constituents who have benefited from the Urban Development Commission and who are still benefiting to this day. You may not know, Mr. Speaker, sir, but I have strong roots in St. Peter, and the current member for St. Peter can testify to this. My father, Hollis Richards, and the late statesman Owen Seymour Arthur went to school together. And my father told me about the days when the late statesman Owen Arthur and him used to go to the standpipe and fill buckets of water together, because in those days, most of the houses did not have water supplies. My father and the late statesman Owen Arthur grew up together and lived 4 houses away from each other. Despite I was raised in Black Rock, Mr. Speaker, sir, I had days as a child roaming in Rose Hill, Ben Hill, Mayners, and Mount Beverter in St. Peter, because my father's side of my family originated from Rose Hill, St. Peter. I can share many stories, Mr. Speaker, sir, but I know the time is limited. I worked, Mr. Speaker, sir, between 4 to 5 general elections, including the last general election in May 2018. I can remember working in the 2003 general election campaign with the former MP for the constituency of St. Michael Northwest, Mr. Mark Williams. And I remember when the former Prime Minister Owen Arthur turned up at the campaign house unexpected, Mr. Speaker, sir. And when he entered the campaign house, sir, after earth had opened, everyone present would jump in. There wasn't any long talk, Mr. Speaker, sir. All I heard the late Arthur said, I want every so-and-so body out of this campaign house now and on the road working. And just the forcefulness of his voice, sir, caused everyone to literally disappear from out of the campaign house at that point in time. Mr. Speaker, sir, the late Arthur said that to win an election, you have to be on the ground. In order to win, you have to spend the time. He said money may be your friend during the campaign, but it can also be your enemy if you don't have it to spend. And one thing that he said to me, sir, was that in politics, you have to put in the time. And you either spend the time or you have to spend money. I never had the money, sir, so I made sure that I put in the time. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to conclude by echoing the words of the Lord, quoting from Psalms 136, verse 1 to 4. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. O give thanks to God of gods, for his mercy endures forever. O give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his mercy endures forever. To him who alone does great wonders, for his mercy endures forever. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to give thanks to the former late Prime Minister Owen Seymour Arthur for developing Barbados and the lives of poor people in this country. I want to give thanks to the former late Prime Minister Owen Seymour Arthur for his good deeds, and may his legacy endure forever, Mr. Speaker, sir. And on the behalf of my constituents, I also wish to extend our condolences to his wife and children and his extended family, Mr. Speaker, sir. May his soul continue to rest in peace and rise in glory.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I too want to lend my support to this debate as it relates to Prime Minister Arthur. Unlike a lot of my colleagues in this House, I would not have had that extensive interaction with him. I was Speaker on five occasions I interacted with him, and in every single situation that I interacted with Prime Minister Arthur, I can say that constituents from St. John would have benefited in some way from that interaction. Mr. Speaker, in 2003, I was working as a youth officer in the Ministry of Youth Affairs. And our current Prime Minister, the Honorable Mayor Amo Motley, would have introduced myself and two other officers to Prime Minister Arthur in Parliament. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas referred to it earlier. This was in relation to Project Oasis. And I remember it was a Tuesday that we went and we saw Prime Minister Arthur, and he said to us, bring me a proposal and I will support this initiative that was then not named. A week later, we took a draft back to Prime Minister Arthur, and he said, I will support this. And that gave birth, Mr. Speaker, to Project Oasis. And for the next 4 years or so across the length and breadth of Barbados, Project Oasis was providing an opportunity for those youngsters who, let me say, reside outside of mainstream society, those individuals who were on the blocks across Barbados. My next interaction, Mr. Speaker, was right in the cabinet office where we have cabinet. I remember going to the estimates because I was told if questions are asked about Project Oasis, you're running the project, you're the one to answer these questions. In the initial stages, the project was capitalized. I believe it was about $150,000. At the end of Project Oasis, it was capitalized at $3 million, more than the budget for the whole Youth Affairs program, Project Oasis. And Mr. Speaker, I said that my interaction also benefited constituents in St. John because we have guys on the blocks in St. John as well that benefited from Project Oasis. On another occasion, I remember that in Maynards, we were providing some equipment for youngsters on the blocks, and I called the office and said, we're doing a presentation to some youngsters on the block in Maynard. Can you ask Prime Minister Arthur if he would be interested in being at the location when we're doing the presentation? And his secretary took the information, Mr. Speaker, and she called and said, yes, gave us a date, and we agree to be in Maynards to do the delivery. Mr. Speaker, I guess in a similar vein to some of those who went before me, we have a couple things in common. My mother worked on the plantation. I, too, am from a poor background. And that is the mantra that I heard throughout the day in relation to tributes. But what impacted me most, Mr. Speaker, in relation to, let's say, my interaction or my knowledge of Prime Minister Arthur was in 2010 when he came to St. John in my village to speak at a political meeting. And I heard it before, but on that particular night, there was a different twist. And I think I heard the Honorable Member for St. George North mention it earlier today. And on the platform in Edgecliff, Prime Minister Arthur indicated that yes, he went to university, and many nights when the bus missed him, that he walked to St. Peter. But he said he didn't only walk to St. Peter from university, he was walking out of poverty. His journey at the university and his walk to his home, he was walking out of poverty. And his daughters are here tonight, Mr. Speaker, and I too am not a father. Like Prime Minister Arthur, I'm a daddy. His daughters are there. And I recognize that since 2018, that was my guiding light in terms of how I treat to the constituency of St. John and the people in St. John, because I am a father of three, and I'm exceedingly pleased, Mr. Speaker, standing here tonight, that my children who came as a result of half belonging to me, the interaction. And I have a son who's in banking. I have a daughter who's a doctor. And sitting here today, Mr. Speaker, I got a note from my last daughter that she was just accepted into UWooden to do those 2 years. So like those young ladies, Mr. Speaker, it is good to know that this journey now since 2018 was shaped by those words about walking out of poverty as a result of a solid education. And for the rest of my political life, Mr. Speaker, I am here to facilitate the needs and aspirations of the young persons in the constituency of St. John, to ensure that the same pride that I have from that message and from my interaction as a daddy, not a father, that I too can contribute to several persons within the constituency of St. John walking out of poverty through ensuring that the 3 primary schools that I have in St. John excel, that they become institutions of excellence on the landscape of St. John. To ensure that all of the infrastructure that is necessary to move St. John forward in the same way that Prime Minister Arthur moves St. Peter forward, where you can see change on the landscape. If nothing else, Mr. Speaker, on the day of that funeral, to see individuals lining the streets in St. Peter on both sides speak, I mean, I was blown away. And you only do that because of the life of the man that we are here paying tribute to this evening. And I don't expect that will happen in St. John in terms of lining the streets, Mr. Speaker. But at the end of this political journey, and one youngster, one family in St. John indicate that my life was changed as a result of the representation from Charles Griffith, then I would have achieved a small portion of what Prime Minister Arthur achieved in his years as Prime Minister and as an MP for the constituency of St. John. So I too want to extend my deepest sympathy to all of you and your family on behalf of myself, on behalf of the constituency of St. John, on behalf of the branch in St. John. My political journey now is simply to help persons walk out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity tonight and I join this honorable members, in paying tribute to the life of Professor the Right Honorable Owen S. Arthur. And a lot indeed has been said by my colleagues, which I have no intention to rehash, but I just want to locate my contribution in the simple but very important theme as I look at Owen, the MP. A lesson in excellent representation. I first heard about Prime Minister Arthur soon after I joined the Barbados Labour Party back in 1980. At that time, there were political titans around. The late Tom Adams, my mentor, the one who actually caused me to join this party. You had persons like E.W. Barrow, Sir Harold St. John, H.B. St. John then, Henry Ford, and of course Burton Hines, the man who Owen replaced as Member of Parliament for St. Peter. The life of this, the political journey of this man called Owen Seymour Arthur was not an easy one. And I remember as a youngster, fresh out of school and now into the workforce, back in 1980 when I worked at Cave Shepherd and Company Limited, I remember the many arguments and discussions that there were as Owen came into political life. He met many obstacles, much criticism. He talked about how he stammered. They talked about how this man had come and mashed up the economy in Jamaica and now come back to Barbados to do the same thing. That was the talk. That was the talk. You know, he was confronted. He had a tough by-election. He lost and came again. And in my view, that shaped, all those things shaped Prime Minister Arthur to perhaps become the best Member of Parliament that any constituency would want to have. St. Peter, indeed, as I look at it, because I'm a neighbor, and there are parts of St. Peter that electorally belong to St. Lucie. We share borders in Tree Hill, we share borders in Alexandria, we share borders in Oxford. But in 90% of those cases, most of the borders belong to me. But because of the Labour Party leaning in St. Peter, I don't obviously get votes along that particular corridor. But St. Peter lacked for nothing where their MP was concerned, be it infrastructural development, transportation, recreational facilities, nothing of the sort. Whatever that was necessary, Owen did for his constituency. And that is the kind of representation I want to emulate, even though I may never be the Minister of Finance. But the one thing he always said this: you have to find creative ways to help your constituency. He always said that. I remember hearing him say that on more than one occasion. You don't have to wait for the government to do everything, but you build relationship with the private sector and so on, and you can get a number of things done within your constituency. Obviously, then the government infrastructure would come in play and help you along, right? His stance was that he would never leave a development plan for his constituency for somebody to come and do after him. I intend to be the same. Because whatever development there has to be in St. Lucie, I intend to do it for as long as the people of St. Lucie would have me there, because this is the way Owen Arthur thought. He was quiet when you see him moving around, but he had some good values and some good lessons to teach a young parliamentarian. young parliamentarians, a number of us here tonight. Owen was not just the people's man across the country, but particularly so in his homeland, St. Peter, his hometown. Not often would you find someone who would have grown up, spent the early childhood, everything, born in a constituency, grown up in that constituency, and then turn out to be the member of parliament for that constituency. A number of us perhaps have that that opportunity. The honorable member for St. Peter, the honorable member for St. Thomas as well, and the honorable member for St. John. A number of us, and we have to ensure that we do right by our constituencies. This is the path, as far as I'm aware, and as far as I see, as I watch on, growing up as a youngster, I watched this method being exhibited by Owen Seymour Arthur. That is very, very important. From his way, in my view, was that the constituency that raised him, he had to give back to. And that is why he represented St. Peter with every sinew in his body. I remember I had recently become the candidate for St. Lucie back in 2006, and there was a house fire in one of the borders we shared in Daytree Hill. And I went to that particular fire, and while I was there, turned up in his Jeep M50, the MP for St. Peter, and he said, "Young boy, it's good to see you. You're learning fast." It was in his part of the constituency, but I heard the trail and I went, And you would not think, though, in some instances, you don't normally find, perhaps, prime ministers, you think that they have the time to attend, to look at things like that. But Owen found the time for his constituency. And his contribution, his method of representation, should be emulated by all of us. That is very, very important. He also found the time to visit the community shops, to sit with his peers and youngsters alike to enjoy a game of cards, dominoes, whatever. He found the time to do it because he felt that. He always said all politics is local, and you must always find that time to spend in your constituency. Of course, and in my closing, he has some connections in Pike Corner too, in St. Lucie. He was of the you heard in his eulogy about the man Harry Kite, who was related to him, and he was from St. Lucie, Pike Corner, the very district where I was born and grew up. But this is one thing that stayed with me. That stayed with me for a long time. I did it in my first campaign. I remember the night in Spicestown, where KFC now is, the car park. At that time, Cave Shepherd would have been below. The courts is there now, and so on. And in the car park, above there in the Spicestown Mall, there was a meeting being held there by the Barbados Labour Party during the campaign. And Owen came on to the strains of the song, "I Just Called to Say I Love You." I just called to say how much I care. I just called to say I love you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. That night, even now, I got goose pimples, I got goosebumps when that song was played. And Owen showed by the life he lived and the representation that he gave, not just to St. Peter, no, but to Barbados. He didn't just come. He didn't just call to say so. He showed that he did indeed love his constituency, the place of his birth. He showed that he did indeed love his country, Barbados. And I want to say that this is the kind of representation that I want to leave behind. To his family, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much, because I understand that it would be difficult sometimes and challenging when as a family man, he could not be there because he was called to national duty. I want to say thank you for the time you lent him to Barbados. Thank you for the time you lent him to all of us. And his contribution will ever be remembered his contribution would ever be remembered, Mr. Speaker, as the man, for me, he was a great example of good and proper representation. I'm obliged to you.
Honorary Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At 10 minutes after 10, I remember, I think I heard, last time I heard him say it was in West Terrace in 2013. Somebody quoted it earlier, that at this kind of hour of the night, he only, his widow just laughed. I'm not sure like he was telling the truth. But at this time of the night, he only did things that cause, and he used the word intense. And when he used words like intense, you will see mischief in his face, intense pleasure. Tonight, though, at this hour, this is not intense pleasure, even though there is some pleasure involved in being able to pay tribute to one who I consider my mentor and one who is responsible for me being here to actually pay this tribute this evening. I begin where I think he would want me to begin, because in February he told me this, he repeated this about 4 times in the space of about 60 seconds. And I'm happy that it is in the actual resolution that we are speaking to this evening. One of the clauses, this is clause maybe 8 or 7 or 8, says, and whereas the father of the house, having served those 34 years as a constituency representative of his beloved parish of St. Peter, boasting of being the only prime minister to represent the constituency of his birth, that the constituency would also feel his transformative touch as the son of a carpenter and a plantation laborer, and he would want to transform his northern parish. Now, I start with that because I do not want to end and forget to mention it, because the last time I forgot to mention it, he chastised me. So I wanted to start with that. Because, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Arthur was very passionate about the parish of his birth. While I was, I think, president-elect of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, we invited him to give a speech. We would always invite the leaders of both parties at 2 different times of the year. On this particular occasion, his bio was shared with the audience. And the matter of his schooling is obviously a part of the bio. His bios in these scenarios always include his schooling, because he's very proud of the fact that he went to All Saints. We call it the College on the Hill. I was, in the last election, a little bit unsure about myself because I did not go to All Saints, even though I'm from Rosehill as well. I went to Black Bess, but that's a different story. And Courage Parry was also mentioned. Now, I heard the full thing, and I didn't hear the school that we have in common, he and I did not hear that school mentioned. So, Mr. Arthur's an interesting man. When he was finished, he came back and sat down. I asked about it. Up to now, Mr. Speaker, he hasn't answered me. But I know that Mr. Arthur was very, very focused on St. Peter, his roots, his heritage, his family, his district, and that is what shaped him. there's another aspect of his growing up that I know that his brother Richard would want me to share this evening as well. We talk a lot about the scripture that he would share. And even though his attendance might not have been as frequent as his wife would have wanted it to be in later time, Mr. Arthur did, for some period of time, teach a Sunday school. And so his familiarity with scripture was not from as he would read Shakespeare and all the other books. He had a familiarity with scripture because he actually taught scripture. In another place I've paid tribute, and I'm not going to go through all those except to mention the themes that I use, and I'm just going to use words. For us in St. Peter, for me and all of the constituents, Mr. Arthur was a visionary. I think enough has been said to support that idea. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, spoke to that big picture approach. For us, he was also a teacher. That was also spoken to, but I have to indicate here that one of the reasons why I decided to study economics at university was because for the first time, I heard somebody in budget speeches, but in budget replies in those days, contributions to budget debates, so this would have been maybe 84, 85, I heard somebody explaining economic concepts in a way that a teenager could understand. And I found it interesting because prior to that, it seemed to me that these kinds of discussions were for people who went to university for 20 years and whose heads were really large. Mr. Arthur was able to break down important concepts, maybe sometimes difficult concepts, but break them down in a way that allowed persons like myself to want to listen to a budget debate because we were able to understand the principles and the concepts. Mr. Arthur was also a practitioner, and that was one of the areas that I think made him, for me and for us, outstanding. There are lots of people who know a lot of theory, but being able to translate theory into practice, into real life, there is often a disconnect. Mr. Arthur was able to use his theoretical knowledge. He had a bachelor's degree. He had a master's degree in economics. And he was able to use all those theoretical concepts to connect to real life issues. And I believe one of the areas of genius of the man was that while being visionary and strategic, he was also able to connect to day-to-day activity, day-to-day realities. That kind of a combination is not common. There are people who, I went to school with a gentleman who knew mathematics. I mean, we used to call him Kublai for those who went to school at the time we went to school. But the ability to translate heavy concepts into real activity, real situations is not something that every great academic is able to master. Every great strategic thinker, he was able to put into practice all of those concepts. Well, all of us know he was fearless. We've talked about shipwriter and standing up to the OECD. I spoke to him, it was something before Christmas. I had just done a tour in town, and I saw him in Parliament Yard. And I think he's gone to his grave thinking that we need to remain aggressive in our standing up to blocs like the OECD and the EU. He believed very strongly that we ought to be equal partners on the world stage, and that we have the intellectual capacity to stand up for what we believe in spite of whatever the consequences may be. And the Honourable Member for the City put that quite well, so I wouldn't need to go there any further. The role of education, that has been spoken to, and we in St. Peter understand his perspective on that education was the way out of poverty, education was the way to develop self, education was also and is also the way to develop country. And we can see in this generation of leaders of the Barbados Labour Party that continuing commitment to education as integral and important in personal but also in country development. And our approach to that, Mr. Speaker, I would want to say is something that we've inherited from former Prime Minister Arthur. Mr. Arthur was inclusive, very inclusive, and there's a lot of talk about the politics of inclusion. Hindsight is always 20/20 vision. I gotta be careful what I say because my tongue is not like his. My brain isn't either. There are people now who speak to the politics of inclusion without rancor or acrimony. In St. Peter, we are aware that that was not always the case. He got a lot of licks over his concept of the politics of inclusion. But in St. Peter, we recognize that in order to develop a small country, we all had to do it together. So that in St. Peter, the way we practiced and still practice politics is that at election, there is the abusing and the grandstanding and all the other stuff because we hold different positions. But when the election is over, we have to go back living together because we are all in this together. And he recognized, like we recognize, that we have to live together. He came from a family, like many families, where there are people strong on one side and people strong on another. On a number of elections, he ran against his first cousin. So there is the understanding in St. Peter that can happen in family. But at the end of the day, we have to embrace each other if we are to move forward. And that inclusive nature, that inclusive concept that he brought to the table reflected his nature. And it reflected, and I think we can now look back to recognize that including people, in spite of their own beliefs, is something that we have to hold on to. And that is why the policies of this Barbados Labour Party continues to be that we will include people. We will not discriminate against people in spite of their choices, in spite of their value systems. We see people as human beings. That is how Mr. Arthur saw people. People who we can engage with, even if you abuse them. And those people who suffered at the tongue of Mr. Arthur, these stories can fill many volumes. They'll get abused today, and he will call tomorrow as if nothing had happened. The recognition that we argue, and for him, I would call it arguing. I use the word abuse because it was a little stronger than arguing. But at the end of the day, he recognized that all of us had to pull together. All of us had to band together. In the tribute that I wrote, I used the word conviction. I said he was a man of conviction. And that is really the politically correct term. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Arthur was the most stubborn man I know. Stubborn. once he was very self-confident, and once he had interrogated his own decision-making process and had come to the conclusion that he was right, then there was nobody, at least on earth, who could convince him that he was not right. And that was the man. A man who stood by his conviction, a man who was stubborn. And of course, everybody knows that he was a straight talker. So he pulled no punches. The Honorable Prime Minister spoke to the fact that he asked no quarter, give no quarter. So he would take, but you could rest assured that he was going to give, and give sometimes in a very, very rough way. The people of St. Peter, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Peter had, and I would say still have, a very interesting relationship with Mr. Arthur. And it was a relationship based on love for the man and respect for him. I encountered, after 2014, Mr. Arthur left the Barbados Labour Party in 2014. And the people of St. Peter were very upset with Mr. Arthur for him leaving the party. But what I found on the campaign trail is that people would first criticize, sometimes very strongly, him having left the party, but would almost immediately go on to praise him for his representation, to talk about how much they loved him. They would call me inside to show me the pictures that they still have up in the house. Because in spite of his decision, the people of St. Peter recognize that this man, Mr. Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister Arthur, was a man who had their interests at heart, a man who believed in St. Peter. He was not as proud as he was of his family, especially his daughters, but going through St. Peter and seeing the transformation in Boscobel, in parts of French Village, in the castle, in the Mount, in Gaze. There were a number of places in St. Peter where you can see the transformation, very, very visible transformation that took place during the years of the stewardship of Mr. Arthur. And it pleased him to see the transformation of the parish that shaped him, the parish of his birth, of his growing up, the parish that he loved. Mr. Arthur was a mentor to me. And I began by, or early on I said that he is responsible for me being here today. First, like I said earlier, my decision to study economics, I switched then to do a double, economics and accounting, but that was because my father asked me one day, when you finish studying economics, we're gonna get a job. So I started to do some thinking. He told me, well, you could only work in the central bank. And I think it was because at that time, Mr. Arthur was working in the central bank, or working with the central bank, or I think he was working actually in the central bank. So I decided to do economics and accounting. But that decision, and accounting, that decision was due, like I indicated earlier, to the fact that I realized that economics was not just some theory or some amalgam of theories up in the air somewhere, but that economics really explained real life. It explained how individuals operated. Economics explains how firms, that's what you call it in economic theory, firms, businesses, companies, organizations, how firms operated, and economics explained how, and explains how countries, how economies operate. So my decision to study economics was based in some measure on his making the subject very real to me. Then he agreed to my entry into politics. I don't remember who said it earlier, but he uses scouts. Oh, it was the Honorable Mayor for the city. And I was minding my business one day at a funeral, and no Consul General Holder asked me the question. So I thought about it for a couple of minutes, and I really should have gone home and asked a few questions, but you know how men are. I responded, and then a couple of weeks later, Mr. Holder told me that Mr. Arthur said, perfect. But I'd recognize, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Arthur has had a lot of confidence in the people of St. Peter. And I think it was based on not just him, but it was based on maybe his own entry into politics, where the people of St. Peter, hearing these stories, the oldsters in St. Peter still like to talk about these stories, hearing about all these people who were coming to take over from Burton Hines. And the people of St. Peter, Sheriff, Pee-wee, a number of the oldsters, Mr. Jilts, a number of them, saying to Tom Adams, Prime Minister Adams, and the others who were the power brokers and the bigwigs, don't bring nobody. We got somebody. And that person was Mr. Arthur. And I realized that maybe coming out of that and his other experiences, I'm sure, he had a lot of confidence in the people of St. Peter to do the job of representing those who they would be called or elected to represent. During the period 2013 to 2018 was a very interesting period in the life of the Barbados Labour Party. Now, I found myself in 2013 as the person identified by Mr. Arthur, well, officially identified more in 2014, but in 2013, starting to move around, because I spoke on some spot meetings, at some spot meetings in 2013. I was actually assigned to, besides St. Peter, St. George South. But after the challenges in the relationship between Mr. Arthur and the Barbados Labour Party, I found myself, or I felt, that I was in a real, in St. Peter we say ticklish, in a ticklish position. And as the rancor, and I heard the Honorable Member for St. Thomas speak to this earlier, because sometimes the rancor is amplified, not because of those who are involved, but because of the others who are looking to create mischief. So there are always, and I want to say to young people who may be listening if they're not sleeping, that this is not anything peculiar to politics. It is common in leadership everywhere, where there are people who join sides and then create more problems than the antagonist and the protagonist. That always happens. So as a neophyte at that time, I wasn't sure who were the troublemakers. I wasn't sure of anything. So I just tried to keep my head down and focus. But I have to say that in everything that was happening, Mr. Arthur never asked me to take a position one way or another. And my respect for him has always been high, but every time I think back about that, I get emotional. the challenge, and I'm going on a little bit long, but I am the MP for St. Peter now. And when I'm going to speak about a time when I spoke, when I was given 10 minutes to speak, and he told me very sharp and very rough, don't let anybody make you talk for 10 minutes. Talk for as long as you want to talk.
You know, only remember that can happen here.
No, because I know that you will control
No,
things.
you understand that part, just started.
But,
Remind you.
but the major challenge, from my recollection, was over the handling of the solid waste tax and the party's response to that. Now, where I found myself in a lot of hot water was because that was when I was publicly identified as the person. It was at a branch meeting in St. Joseph. I was now publicly identified as the person who would handle the St. Peter response. I was asked, those who were involved know the issues, but I was asked to speak at the public meeting in Carolina Car Park. Now, when I was asked that question, I did not know what to say, because I'd known of the challenges. So I went home and I called Mr. Arthur, and I was actually surprised at his response. Surprised not because I didn't recognize his magnanimity, but surprised because, given what I perceived to be the tensions, I did not expect the answer. And he said to me, yes. And that is when he said, but not for the 10 minutes, which I think I was asked to speak for. Even with the challenge that Mr. Arthur had with his colleagues, the other colleagues' approach to the matter, he said to me, yes, go ahead and speak. And he actually spent about half hour that Sunday morning. I think he was cooking. No, I think it was before. It was pretty early in the morning. And he spent about half an hour talking me through a number of things. The dynamics of speaking on the platform at Carolina Car Park, speaking next to the sea, as well as how I should frame my speech on that evening. And I remember, after having spoken, a friend coming to me, bringing, not news, but somebody turned up at the meeting and saw me speaking. And it seemed as though they started to panic. How come he talking at this meeting? Not knowing that I'd had the blessing of Mr. Arthur. I said that, Mr. Speaker, and I felt the need to share that, to indicate that Mr. Arthur was the kind of man who, in spite of whatever he was dealing with, did not seek, in my situation, to put me in a situation that would have been difficult for me. And I have to respect and admire a man like that. He did not put me in any bad situation. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is that after having left the party, there were I was hearing all kinds of stuff through both ears about the fact that before that, Mr. Arthur had more or less said to me, you will go to whatever he was invited to, he would send me. That caused a lot of issues too. I went to something, the reopening of the Marina Brewster home at Fars, and the constituency assistant had indicated that I would have been there, but the Prime Minister of the time, the former member for St. Michael South, didn't know. So I turned up, and the seat that is reserved for the MP, they're taking me to the seat. So I see all kinds of people turning around looking at me really strange. But he allowed me to find my feet, to be exposed in all kinds of scenarios. When I would say to him, maybe you should attend this, he said, you gotta go home. you walk along. So he helped me to get accustomed to the kind of situation that I found myself in subsequent to May 2018. But after his departure from the party, there were lots of voices wondering whether or not, but first, if the relationship between he and I would change, if he would be as accommodating, if he would even support me. And I think, well, history has shown has provided the answers to those questions. I continued to represent him. The relationship continued as though nothing had happened. There were persons who thought that I would have to find a new home, and Mr. Arthur allowed me to use his constituency office because it was his. He was a member of Parliament right up until the 24th of May 2018. But that was my home base. It remained my home base throughout those years, those 4 years, 2014 to 2018. No change at all in the relationship. And the expectation of a smooth transition is what was intended in 2013 and is what happened in 2018. A man who was true to his word, who was constant and consistent, who was principled, who, when he gave his word, stuck to his word in spite of what was going on around in the environment. That is the man who I know as Owen Arthur, Prime Minister Arthur. I heard the Honorable Member from St. Lucie. I've never, in life or death, been able to call him Owen. It just feels very, very, very strange to me. I always call him Prime Minister, or if I'm speaking about him, I would say Mr. Arthur. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be much longer, but there are a couple of things I just want to mention. The idea of a sense of self. It has been mentioned before, but I need to speak to it again. Mr. Arthur was a very confident man. I thought about being stubborn, holding to convictions. It was not willy-nilly, as we would say. He would interrogate himself. And that interrogation of his own views, I think, based on what he said to me, came from a situation where former Prime Minister Tom Adams had put him through the ringer, and he had to fight to get Mr. Adams, Prime Minister Adams, to hear him out. But once he was able to explain himself and defend the paper that he wrote, he grew in the estimation of Prime Minister Adams. And that was the kind of person that Mr. Arthur became. Somebody who would insist on the interrogation of views. So you couldn't just put a view on the table. You had to be able to support that view. You had to be able to defend that perspective, because he wanted to understand that you were thinking. That kind of self-examination made him quite confident in his own ability, but he sought to share that sense of self with others. And so the whole matter of the Pan-African Commission, the celebration of national heroes, the assignment of a National Heroes Day, Emancipation Day, the season of emancipation, the day of national significance. These were all parts of a view that Mr. Arthur held, that he had a responsibility to help us to understand ourselves. He had a responsibility to help us to be able to hold our heads up high, so that when he stood up to big powers, big countries, and trading blocs. It was because he recognized that he is equal with any of them. And he wanted us to have that same confidence in ourselves. And so the matter of celebrating our African heritage, celebrating the fact that our heroes are not Nelson and Sir Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and all those people we read about in books. Our heroes, and one of them is another St. Peter man, the Right Excellent Sir Frank Leslie Walker. Our heroes are the people who fought for us. And he wanted us to understand that. And so that sense of self, I think, is for me, a very important contribution that he has made to the development of the country. And it says to me, Mr. Speaker, and I think it should say to the chamber and to the country, that, and I'm not going to use the term even as an economist, I'm going to say that as an economist, he recognized that economics did not stand alone. Economics was but a part of a system of development. So that development, and I think, I know he was a democratic socialist, but I know he held a principle that I understand to be a Marxist principle, and it is that the social and political superstructure is based on solid infrastructure. And he saw that infrastructure as the economic base. And so for him, putting that base together was important, but it was not the end all. The base was important only so that it could support social, political, and normal human development. He saw a good economy, a strong economy, as the basis for developing people. And that, Mr. Speaker, for me, is what made former Prime Minister, Professor the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, a great man in this country. He would say to me that government is difficult, but he would also say that if at the end of a day he was able to move Barbados forward 1 inch, he felt that he had achieved something on that day. That helped to prepare me, because I recognize in government that you can't move a meter or a kilometer very easily. And so his counsel about at least trying to move 1 inch, in other words, just keep moving forward. Don't be sidetracked. Don't be disappointed if the movement is not leaps and bounds, but try to move forward every day. July the 27th of this year was not a good day for me. Not a good day for a whole lot of people. I felt as though a void had been created. And I really could not understand it, because Prime Minister Arthur and I did not speak every day. Our relationship was mentor-mentee as opposed to friendship. But a friend of mine sent me a message from Geneva to say that what I was going through was, part of it could have been the fact that I felt that I was now realizing that the baton had fully passed. And I realized in that explanation that in my first 2 years as a member of Parliament for St. Peter, even though it was not in the front of my mind, the fact that he was around was providing emotional support for me, because he was there. So he was available if I had a question. But July 27th changed that. I was happy, though, that in February of this year, we were able to honor him in St. Peter during our month, our celebration of regathering. He participated in the church service, and I asked the Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Sir Hilary, to give a lecture in his honor from coffee to Owen, recognizing the struggle that Mr. Arthur was a part of, and that he recognized that he was a part of. This struggle to come out of poverty, to come out of a situation where you've been downpressed and suppressed, to take leadership of yourself, of your destiny, but also leadership of your country, and in many respects, leadership of a region. And Mr. Arthur, those of us on our committee, we still share photos. He was obviously very happy to have been a part of that celebration. The only thing he said to me was that he said, "You put me to read a lesson, but if I had a chance to talk, I would have said that you invite me to the church service, but you have not invited me to the shop lines." But he was evidently very happy to be among his people. And the response of the people to the man demonstrated that that love continued. That love continued. I was honored to have been asked to coordinate the funeral. And I want, at this point, to thank all those who were involved in the planning and in the execution of the funeral service. You could sense, and I'm moving away now from St. Peter, because those who were involved were from across the country. But Mr. Speaker, you could sense from all those who were involved the desire to execute a service that they and all of us felt was befitting a man of the stature and a man who made the kind of contribution that Owen Seymour Arthur made to this country. And so all those involved pulled out all the stops to make sure that the service was one befitting him. And I thank them. I've written to them already, but I thank them sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I also know that the family, his wife, Julie, and Sabrina and Leah, and all the rest of the family are equally happy with the dedication of those who were part of the planning process, as well as those who helped to execute the actual service. On behalf of my family, and on behalf of the people of St. Peter, we recognize the contribution of a great man. We recognize the contribution of maybe the only hero that many of us know. We also, my family and my constituents, would want to and actually extend to his wife Julie, Sabrina and Leah, our thanks for allowing him to be the kind of member of parliament that he was, for being an inspiration to us, even as he was an inspiration to his family. There was one area where I didn't have to experienced, at least not yet, what he went through. One night he said to me, he said, "Me calling, he said, he said, my daughter gone away. He said, I crying all the time." It was at UE. No, it was not UE. She was at UE at that lecture. It was sometime after that. I think she was preparing to go away. Yes, she was preparing to go away. And he was, I don't know. You know, when you see a man, we heard the term tonight, sometime today, striding like a colossus. A man who you know to be a colossus, almost getting on like a child, don't know what to do because his daughter is about to go away. But that was the kind of man he was. And that is the kind of man that my family and the people of St. Peter would want to recognize, would want to emulate, would want to thank the family for providing to us and allowing us to have the benefit and to be able to move forward, because he saw life as a continuum. He recognized that he was standing on the shoulders of those who went before. He always recognized that people before him had done work. He had a responsibility to do work. He has left us now, Mr. Speaker, to continue on the journey of doing the unfinished business that is still there to be done. And so I would want to end by using his terms. We in St. Peter promise not to settle for bronze. We promise not to settle for silver. We will go for the gold. I'm obliged to you.
Honorable member, before you read the resolution or ask for the resolution to be adopted, I do believe it is incumbent for me to speak for just about 2 minutes in relation to Wayne Arthur. I believe that I am in a unique position, myself and the honorable member for St. James South. We are in a unique position in this chamber, having studied at the feet of Wayne Arthur in 1981 to 1982. I was but a young man at KFL campus, having gone through Dr. Wendell Samuel, Wendell McLean, doing macroeconomics and microeconomics. And in my second year, there was a new course being offered in Caribbean Economic Affairs. Having gone through both Wendell's with all these theoretical constructs, all the mathematical formulae, GMP, GDP, NMP, oligopoly, monopoly, duopoly, all the theoretical constructs. I mean, we heard this new Caribbean Economic Affairs. We were told that it was being taught by Wayne Arthur. We didn't know who this man was. Just another person coming to lecture. And I can vividly recall, and the class was at 7 to 8 on mornings, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock on mornings. Yes, 7 to 8, I'll never forget it. And I remember seeing this young man in clad in shirt jack suit with pointed tips, black pointed tips. Remember it very well. And a brown bag, and strode into the class. No books. Wayne Arthur never really taught out of any books. He would compile notes, comprehensive notes. I can guarantee you that I still have some of those notes from 1981 to 1982 in my collection at home. Such was the nature of these notes. And he had a Caribbean philosophy. And actually I have one of the books, I brought one of the books that he taught from. And he transformed his teachings of economics into his political life. He believed in the political economy. And one of his books that he used all the time was Readings in the Political Economy of the Caribbean, edited by Norman Gerber and Warren Jefferson. Right. And he would have used extracts from Professor Clive Thomas, George Beckford, and the like. And the concepts that he brought into political life as it related to the concepts of like full employment and stuff, these were garnered out of these collections. And he did a lot of work in relation to Professor Alison McIntyre. Right. So these concepts that he brought to the political sphere, they were nothing new to me because I understood them. And when he taught, these things were so simplistic. And he made me develop a love for economics. After being taught by Owen, I taught economics from 1980 for 15 years. But these things were simplified. As I said, it became too easy. Just too easy. And he walked on mornings to class, you know, so don't think that he drove anything. He walked. What made this man even so amazing, he was the first lecturer at the university in social science. I can guarantee you that. That when we did the exam, after the exam, he took us over home. We had a reception at his home after the exam. That was one answer. He didn't change. As humanistic as possible. And I remembered also vividly some of his adventures in the political arena. He was a nightmare for detail, for security. If he believed that the present Prime Minister had given her personal security bodyguards nightmare, trust me. I remember it vividly in 1998, at a crop over event on Spring Garden. Myself and another youngster, we were there having a good time in a bar. My friend had just bought his favorite stuff. Something to drink, obviously. And you know he loved a pork chop. The fella had just bought a pork chop. When the Prime Minister at the time was with his personal bodyguard, Station Sergeant Phillips. When he came, shouted me, and the chap took away the pork chop, started to eat it. A bottle was on the table, and he poured a drink, and that was it. Gone through the crowd and gone. That was the nature of the man. A level of humanity. Humility, you talk about it. As I said, he was striking. I remember in 2008. The election was called. I was overseas with my wife on a cruise, and I was on a cruise. I think it was in Mexico. And my phone rang, because obviously I'm a lawyer, so, and I always have, his number is still on my phone, you know, as the Prime Minister. His number is still in my phone, you can tell that. And the number came up, the name came up, Prime Minister. I told my wife, no, what one in Africa want this kind of thing? Honestly, I told her that. He said, he called election, and where you at? I said, sir, but I go overseas on a cruise with my wife. He said, when you come back, you can speak on platforms. And that was it. Phone down. That's it. But that is the nature. That is Wayne Seymour Arthur. And you cannot in any way say anything but good of this man. That he had Barbados at heart. He had Barbados at heart. He wanted transformation for Barbados. That is why all of his teachings related to transforming society, to ensure that the wide gap, that it is brought closer, that we must get away from the have-nots. All of us should be haves. That's how he was. The eradication of poverty was first and foremost on his mind. He understood poverty. He knew what hard life was. He wanted a betterment for Barbadian society. And he worked extensively, feverishly, to ensure that he brought about transformational change in the landscape of this country. I am indebted to his knowledge for having imparted this knowledge and appreciation of what society is all about. On behalf of my family, my wife and I, and the entire St. Michael Central constituency, I wish to express sincere condolences to you, his beloved widow, and his 2 children, and all of his extended family. And may God continue to bless you. You can read the resolution.
Mr. Speaker,
Do you have the resolution, sir?
yeah.
Great.
Whereas Professor, the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur, and one of Her Majesty's Council passed this life on the 27th of July, 2020, and whereas Professor Arthur was a member of this House from 1984 to 2018, a member of the Honorable the Senate from 1983 to 1984, leader of the opposition 1993 to 1994, and 2010 to 2013, Prime Minister of Barbados from 1994 to 2008, and independent member of Parliament from 2014 to 2018. And whereas this distinguished economist, longest serving and highly successful Prime Minister, achieved unprecedented success in transforming the socio and economic landscape of Barbados. And whereas this brilliant economist presided over the longest period of economic stability the country has experienced, evidenced by record levels of foreign reserves, substantial tax breaks and wage increases, coupled with massive foreign and local investments. And whereas that brilliance shone on the tapestry of the political economy, where he sought to address the toughest issues facing the country, one such issue was the vexing one of unemployment, which stood at 24% when he took office, and by the time he left, it had been wrestled down to a new low of 7.4%, prompting scholars to ask what was the natural rate of unemployment in Barbados. And whereas this strident regionalist, in his relentless pursuit and advocacy for the advancement of the CARICOM single market and economy, would be propelled into the role of chief architect and intellectual guide of the CARICOM single market and economy in 2006, and a champion of its cause with vigor, clarity, and determination. And whereas the father of the house, having served those 34 years as the constituency representative of his beloved parish of St. Peter, boasting of being the only prime minister to represent the constituency of his birth, that constituency would also feel his transformative touch as the son of a carpenter and a plantation laborer, would go on to transform his northern parish from the proverbial backwater to a modern hub of architectural heritage and tourism, with improved public services and improved quality of life that would thereafter be the exemplar of constituency politics. And whereas this son of humble origins brought to the political stage the quintessential intellectual mix of economics and politics, which represented a shift from the traditional law and politics, and to a lesser extent, medicine and politics, a unique mix of skills that would serve him well in the period into which he was to be immediately thrusted, consequent upon the 1994 election campaign, and for which he would thereafter receive extraordinary regional and international acclaim for his management of the economy. And whereas the nature of the late Professor Arthur's service in his several endeavors was characterized by the generous employment of his prodigious gifts of a transcendent intellect, ebullient charm, remarkable leadership, elevated by the ability to motivate and inspire by example, wedded to economic proficiency. And whereas his service was an amalgam of these skills with visionary ideas, clarity of purpose, pragmatism, meticulous preparation, and sheer hard work, along with a Barbadian aesthetic and a Caribbean ideal to forge unimaginable and unprecedented success for Barbados, given it an altogether new luster in the world, be it resolved that this honorable house shares the sorrow felt by a grateful nation and extends its deepest sympathies to his widow Julie, children Sabrina and Leah, siblings Valme, Richard, and Patricia, and relatives of the late Professor, the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur, and expresses its wish that they be comforted by the memory of a life lived selflessly and in the service of his nation and his people. Dated this 22nd day of September, 2020.
Let us stand to observe a minute silence in passing of this resolution. That's it.
Mr. Speaker, recommittal of announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker.
I am in receipt of a letter from the Honorable Glenn Clark, Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly. 21st September 2020. His Honor Arthur E. Holder, MP, Speaker of the House of Assembly, Parliament of Barbados, Worthing Corporate Center, Worthing, Christchurch. Your Honor, resignation as Member of Parliament of St. George North. In accordance with Section 45, Subsection 1, Subsection B of the Constitution of Barbados, I hereby give notice that I shall resign my seat as Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. George North with effect from 30th day of September 2020 at 4:30 p.m. Please be guided accordingly. Yours faithfully, Glenn A. Clark, Member of Parliament, St. George North. I am satisfied that this letter is authentic and in accordance with Standing Order 73. I direct that this order, this letter, this matter shall be placed and called as the first order of the day at the next meeting of this Honorable House of Assembly.
Committal of government business.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that it be resolved by this Honourable House that a humble address be presented to thank Her Excellency for the most gracious speech which it has pleased Her Excellency to deliver to the Parliament last Tuesday, the 15th day of September 2020.
Second.
Beg the second.
The question is that this motion do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Before we, honorable member, before we close proceedings for the day, I wish to thank all of those persons who were responsible for ensuring the successful commencement of the second session of Parliament, which included the throne speech, which was just recently concluded. I would wish to acknowledge the clerks and the deputy clerks of Parliament, the Marshal's office, and all other Parliament staff, also the Cabinet Office, all technicians associated with the event, the Royal Barbados Police Force and the Barbados Defense Force, and last but by no means least, the management and staff of the Lord Erskine Sandifer Center. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hour is late. We have come to the end of today's sitting, the first sitting for this second session of the House of Assembly. We have had the fortune of having the wife of the professor, the late Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur, and his two beautiful daughters, Sabrina and Leah, along with all of the family members and certainly extended friends of the family as well here with us today. And we want to take this opportunity on behalf of the entire Parliament of Barbados to again say thank you to you for giving of Mr. Arthur to this country and certainly to the Barbados Labour Party and to the region. And we want to assure you that you continue to be in our prayers and that we will forever ensure that the legacy of Mr. Arthur continues in this country. Thank you again, and certainly travel safely, Leah, as well as you go on to pursue your studies in the United Kingdom. And we wish you every success from all of the members of Parliament here today as well. With that, Mr. Speaker, we've come to the end of the session, and I beg to move that the House be adjourned until the 29th of September at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until the 29th day of September at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until the 29th day of September at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.